Welcome everyone to a new and special episode of the Tech Cafe podcast. I'm your host, 𝗲𝗲𝗏. Tech Cafe launched in 2023 with a simple mission: to empower the software development community through meaningful conversations. Since then, we've had the privilege of hosting some of the brightest and most inspiring minds in our industry, including Tim Oettinger, Jeff Langer, Mark Richards, 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝗏, and many more. A heartfelt thank you to all our incredible guest speakers who continue to make this journey so enriching. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to host someone whose influence has shaped the very fabric of modern software delivery, 𝗂𝗲𝗄 Shafer. Andrew is one of the early pioneers behind the DevOps movement, alongside Patrick Debois. He has spent the past 2 decades helping organizations evolve at the intersection of people, process, and technology, from co-founding Puppet to leading transformation initiatives as VP of Transformation at Red Hat, and later as Senior Director of Technology at Pivotal. He's a thinker, builder, and leader who has inspired generations of engineers and architects to rethink how teams work together and how we can continuously improve the way we build and operate software. In this session, we'll take a walk down memory lane, exploring the pre-DevOps era, the birth of the movement, and how it evolved into the AI-driven world we live in today. We'll also talk about what's next, the challenges, the trends, and the future of DevOps in an age of automation and artificial intelligence. To our live viewers, feel free to share your questions in the chat. We'll try to take as many as we can towards the end of the conversation. And now, without further ado, let's begin. Andrew, welcome to Tech Cafe. It's a real honor to have you with us.
Assalamu alaikum. The honor is mine. One small thing, the order is backwards. I was at Pivotal for 5 years before I was the VP at Red Hat. But that's the rest of it is true.
Okay, thanks for the correction, Andrew. Okay, so let's start with our questions, and we'll begin with the pre-DevOps era. So between 2005 and 2009, extreme programming had already been around for about 10 years and was gaining real momentum. The Agile Manifesto had been published a few years earlier, and everyone was talking about transforming to Agile software development. XP introduced many principles and practices that must have influenced what would later become DevOps. Talk to us about what was happening during that time and what software development really looked like back then. Also, please tell us about the influence of XP and Agile Manifesto on your mindset and work, and how that shaped what would eventually become DevOps.
So that's a lot of ground to cover. In many ways, the Agile movement was, I told you some of this story before, but I'll tell the listener. So my first exposure to Agile, I didn't like it. I didn't appreciate what was basically being forced on this technical process. And the reason I didn't like it is mostly because it was effectively just the most banal, vanilla version of Scrum. And it wasn't until I got exposed to some of the other ideas, and particularly the technical practices from XP, that I began to understand, okay, there's some value, there's some people, because it seemed like a lot of the Scrum practices were, they were almost religious, like these rituals, but they didn't seem to solve certain problems that I thought we had. And what the thing that I didn't like the most was whenever someone would say, well, that's not Agile, or that's not what Agile people do. It's like, that didn't answer the question, and it didn't solve the problem that we have. You're just making this religious argument that I should believe this thing that is like provably not working for what I consider software development. And I'd already been in some software process, and I worked on programming things for a long time before I got into an organization that did Agile. And then I got very lucky, and I happened to live in Salt Lake City, where 𝗙𝗵𝗆 had it was a monthly Agile roundtable. And that's where I started getting exposed to these other ideas and these other groups of things. So if you look at what XP actually teaches and practices, there's this idea of test-driven development and continuous integration and a bunch of these practices, which I still think people have failed to adopt, right? So like, it's been a long time, 2 decades, and for the most part, people have adopted the vocabulary much more than they've adopted the actual practices. But in my own like mechanical understanding, that I was working on a few things. So by 2004, I was involved in Puppet. My first commits in Puppet for the open source project are in 2004. And so I was seeing some of the evolution of that tool and the automation on that level, that infrastructure level. And then I was also working in an e-commerce startup that had raised, it was a venture funded startup that had raised 15 million or something at the time. And we were struggling in our deployments because of, and I'm sure many people have had this same kind of issue, because of small inconsistencies between the development, the testing, and the production environment. Small configuration changes would have this impact on the service. So what I got to, and what a lot of my kind of mentality for what I was trying to get people to think about with early Agile infrastructure conversations, I didn't think we needed a new word. I thought of this as just a continuation of Agile principles, but applying this idea of continuous integration and kind of test-driven to the infrastructure itself. So if you can't rebuild from source, then you can't really do any of the Agile engineering practices, right? Like TDD starts at the point where you can reproducibly, reliably rebuild from the source code and run the tests against it. So a lot of my motivation in the early days, infrastructure as code and these other conversations were motivated to try to build these reproducible configurations in such a way that I could have confidence that I could make those changes and have it propagate from my development environment to my testing environment to my production environment without disrupting the service. So that was a lot of the motivation, and that connects back to the Agile manifesto and these, especially the technical practices that came from XP.
So Kent Beck once said, while they were writing the manifesto, he said that a goal of Agile was to heal the divide between business and coding. What about ops? How were things back then when it came to deployments, configuration management, and operations? And of course, when I say operations, I mean observability, incident response, and so on.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that divide ever actually healed between coding, but so my background, I came from more software development and coding side of it. And then I got involved in ops as a necessity, and partly, and I've had this conversation with people before about DevOps and SRE and how this evolved for myself. But to me, SRE and DevOps is really about being conscientious, right? And like seeing this whole thing as a system that you're going to take responsibility for. Because in this older version of software where you didn't have to take responsibility, you just put the code in, and then that got put on a CD or the old disks, and then shipped away, and running it was someone else's problem. But what you see happen in between the signing of the Agile Manifesto and the DevOps as a word is the rise of software as a service. So at the point where software has to be run as a service, then the value of that software is entirely in its operations. I will have this argument with anyone that value is not created in dev, value is created in ops. So what that did, and this is part of what I think the DevOps movement represents, is it started elevating the need for operational excellence. And I would argue this is the true advantage of the cloud native organizations at this time, is their operational excellence gives them a significant advantage. Where in many of the enterprises, you see this evolution where IT was this group of people who had the responsibility or the burden, and probably some other words that aren't so nice, of keeping the printers and the laptops and all this stuff working. And in some cases, you still see those organizations put together. Like when people say IT, and they're really talking about running servers and software as a service, it's a totally different discipline than keeping the printers online. It's a totally, the SRE, whatever other language you want to put on top of it. That is a specialized discipline that is creating maximum value for the organization. If your servers are down, then you do not exist. And we see this now even more, where you have these big outages. I don't know exactly what your audience sees when there's a Cloudflare outage or an Amazon outage or some of these other big outages, but it has global impacts in the way that a lot of these systems work now. And if that, then it doesn't exist. So to me, a lot of the software ideology, architectural ideology, falls flat when it meets the reality of a server and running it as a service. So getting that hands-on, like dirty, nasty work. There's no. This is another thing I said many times: is there's no operational responsibility without some organizational trauma. Like it's a burden, psychological burden, to have a pager. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, or any of your audience, but when you're the one that's responsible for keeping these things alive, and if this is down, there's a interesting SRE conversation. We could probably find a few references, but they stopped putting the metrics for Google SREs for how much money they were losing when systems were down, because it was a psychological burden for the teams that had to respond to those incidents.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. And I actually have two comments. So I think that ops is still a challenge and pain everywhere in the world, where you have running, working software in production.
1,000%.
Yeah. So even if we are no longer using pagers anymore, I remember the last time I saw a pager was with my dad. He's a doctor, and he would be on call. And that was many, many years ago. I think now people get the same alerts on Slack and Mattermost and all these kind of tools. But the pain is still there when you receive a call midnight saying that something's not working, something's slow, something has crashed, we got hacked. It's a pain and it's a challenge, and I think that it's something that every software developer or someone who's in IT operations faces, as long as they have working software. And speaking of working software, I like the part where you said that software delivers value when it's in ops or in production. The Agile Manifesto has this principle that says working software is the primary measure of progress. And the problem with this principle is that it has been interpreted in many different ways. There was this ambiguity And when DevOps came out, I think that the ambiguity no longer existed. Everyone agreed that by working software, we mean software in production being used by the actual end users. So yeah, I like that part very much in your answer. Indeed, uh, software delivers value when it is in prod and when it's in ops. Definitely not in dev.
The timing when the Agile Manifesto was first written, the internet existed. It was starting to be something that you could see was going to be the future, but the majority of software was still being shipped in shrink wrap. You know, box CDs. I don't know if you remember those days, but it was you took it, you put it on your machine. If you had a problem, it was you call tech support. You're the one operating most of these things. You didn't have these big centralized servers for most of these things yet.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, so we'll take the last question in the pre-DevOps era. So, did any of the original Agile Manifesto co-authors directly or indirectly influence your thinking or play a role in what came next?
Absolutely. I would say, obviously, I spent hours and hours with Alistair before in the Agile Roundtable, and then I got to have more of a personal relationship with him. So even outside of that context, I had a lot of conversation with him. Now he's been running around the world for a few years, and I moved away from Utah as well. I met a lot of them. I got invited to the anniversary, the like 10-year anniversary at Snowbird. So some people came back for that. I spent time with Brian Merrick, who I also adore. I've had a few good conversations with. I mean, there's a lot of good ideas in that group, right? So you have Martin Fowler, one of my favorites. Ward Cunningham, definitely influence. I really gravitate to the people who are more focused on the technical framing and the practices that kind of came from those versions of Agile more than the sort of Scrum and process oriented people, but definitely influenced everything. And there's lots of other people that weren't in that room. You know, a huge influence on me was the lean stuff from 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝗵𝗳𝗃, and then that goes back to Deming. There's shoulders of giants, right? So we're all building on these ideas, and then the more you learn, and we can get into this a little deeper. It's like all this stuff goes back in time forever, right? Like there's not really that much novelty in a sense. We just have to rediscover the principles.
Yeah, you're right. The part which I liked when you said, even though many people didn't attend the meeting at Snowbird, they did have a lot of influence on how Agile software development went. Tim Oettinger is definitely one of those people. Jeff Langer, Mary Popindick for sure. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Though these people were not there, they definitely influenced this mindset.
And the world changed in other ways too, right? Like this, it's not to put too much of a frame or focus on this, but how many of the people who signed the Agile Manifesto are women?
Unfortunately, no one. Yeah.
So keep that in mind.
Yeah. But maybe it was a different time.
It was a different time, right? We have to judge by the time that they lived in, not the one we live in. So.
Exactly. Okay, so let's move to our next set of questions. So at 2008, there was the Agile conference. You proposed an Agile infrastructure, birds of a feather session. You were also volunteering at the conference and ended up arriving quite late to your own session after getting into a conversation where you were learning about lean software development from 𝗵𝗵 but Patrick Debois did show up, and you two ended up meeting and spending several hours together. Patrick had written a paper about applying Agile process to system administration, while you had ideas about automation. You became friends that day. Tell us about that day, the conversation you and Patrick had, and how those exchanges ended up sparking what became the DevOps movement.
So, like this other comment I just made about the shoulders of giants, I think it's interesting to say this movement started with these people on this time. And I do think that there's a moment in time, and then the word DevOps exists, and it definitely exists because of things that I and Patrick did. But the movement came before that, right? Like the 𝗓𝗏𝗍 conference and all these other things that were happening were contributing to that. So as I was just alluding to in the previous line of questions, I kind of bought into one, that software development was something I wanted to focus on, that optimizing software process practices. So this combination of what I now call socio-technical systems, getting people aligned, getting the right things in place so that you can develop software. Because it was just clear to me that software was this thing that I wanted to be a part of making. And Agile is a big part of that. And I had this opportunity to volunteer for the Agile conference. So that meant all I really had to cover was my travel. And so I went to that conference. And at the same time, I was working on Puppet. And I believed, and I'd already started to sort of evangelize what I was calling Agile infrastructure, which was related to these ideas that I just articulated a minute ago. Is like, can we reproducibly rebuild our infrastructure from source code? Can we reproducibly, confidently reproduce it? And it opens up all these other things that I still think people haven't quite taken full advantage of, although we're getting better every day with our investments in pipelines, hopefully. So I went there with that in mind, and I put this birds of a feather description of trying to talk about automating things and Agile infrastructure. What does it mean to build things from source code at the lowest level? And I, with all the best intentions, ended up in this conversation with this guy who influenced my thinking, 𝗕 𝗏𝗏, who like kind of opened my mind to a bunch of lean things. So I did show up, but I was late. And when I got there, I think Patrick had already left, or he was on some other. I didn't know him yet. So then he found me later, and we ended up kind of crossing paths a few more times, right? We spent a bunch of time talking about these ideas and a bunch of time socializing. And when I say we became friends, that's because like we kept in contact, right? So we were talking about all of these things that we're planning this conference around. I had given a couple of like these Agile infrastructure talks at other conferences. I started organizing a conference. The conference format for DevOps days globally, with half presentations and half open space, was something that the first time I did that was actually a Puppet camp. And then I'd organized another conference called Agile Roots. And Agile Roots was about, like at that point, and this is related to some other threads, I feel like Agile had already sort of moved past its roots and had become this sort of superficial consulting mechanism more than people focused on the practices. So I really wanted to have this thing focused on the practices. That's also where I first got to meet Brian Merrick in person. He gave a talk that I really love at that conference. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on around this movement, but to say that it started at a certain time, that sort of ignores all of these things that were practically happening every day in all of these big web companies that were having to solve the problem that we already said about running software as a service. So if you have this strong divide, wall of confusion, relationship between developers and operators in a organization who's trying to run software as a service, then you're going to have all these predictable problems that come from that mechanism. So you're seeing that by the force of evolution, by the force of necessity change, and that was being openly discussed at 𝗲𝗍 conference. Those conversations were already happening before DevOps became a word and the rest of the DevOps Days story starts.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I like the part where you mentioned building software as a service, because a lot of what you've mentioned actually maps to what we see in the 12-factor application manifesto. A lot of it is actually DevOps. So yeah, and as you've said, everyone stood on the shoulders of giants. I mean, when you look at the XP practices, many of them are what we call today the DevOps practices. So I think that yeah, DevOps is an evolution, as you said, of everything that was happening previously, whether that be in the software development community or within certain companies, working with the challenges of Dev and Ops. So in your answer, you've mentioned the Velocity Conference, and yeah, in 2009, this is where the term DevOps was coined in the now famous talk, 10 plus deploys per day, Dev and Ops cooperation at Flickr. And then you've mentioned that in the same year, you and Patrick helped organize the DevOps Days in Belgium. And yeah, you kicked off a global worldwide movement since then. How did you feel watching all of that unfold, realizing that you've helped spark something that grew into a worldwide movement?
I think this is one of those things where maybe I should be better at self-promoting or taking credit. But in many ways, I feel like it was just inevitable, right? And I was just fortunate enough to be in a position and articulate enough to explain it in a way that people found compelling. And DevOps has been very good to me and my family and a bunch of my friends. But it's just a thing that at a real level, I feel it's inevitable, right? And then you also have all of these things. Actually, I want to go back to connect some of the things you were just saying about the practices and XP. So there's all these different buzzwords that like float by, in our industry. So you have all these things like microservices, you have CI/CD, platform as a service, platform engineering. And in my concept, and I, like, if I'm being very honest, I did not necessarily love the word DevOps when it was first like centering this conversation, because I felt like it was too limiting, which I think is also related to why everyone feels like they need to add some more words to it to make it fit their whatever problem they're trying to solve. But if you are really trying to deliver microservices, or you're really trying to do continuous deployments, or you're really trying to do any of these things, and you don't have something that looks suspiciously like a platform run by people that look like SREs, then you're going to have a hard time. And if you even just go back to the very, very beginning of the XP story, there are so many organizations that would give lip service to Agile and lip service to test-driven development. But if you haven't made an investment in the basic infrastructure to be able to reproducibly rebuild your source code and run the tests on it, then you have no hope of doing any of these basic Agile engineering practices. And if you have made that investment, that starts to look suspiciously like a platform, right? So all these things that people get kind of confused or want to make separations and argue about the nuances, in my mind, it's really only one thing. And it's just about manifesting that at the highest level you can, at the highest level of your skill, the highest level of your understanding for the moment that you're in. And then I'll take it a step further, which may or may not be related to the question, but like lots of the agile or not the agile, but the DevOps conversations get very centered in this as a service sort of web service world. And then lots of organizations see that, but they don't have that problem. They don't have that unique set of opportunities and constraints that a pure web service has, but they still try to copy these things that got legitimized as the DevOps practice. And so you run into this, and this is something that I try to help people navigate, where you're trying to copy, if you're looking at Flickr, their job was to try to put more pictures on the internet, right? That's a very different problem than someone who's trying to solve something in healthcare, or someone who's trying to solve something in finance, and this is another thing I'll lean on some of the ideas that I got from 𝗬𝗆. Everything is about the context. So if you think of this spectrum from I'm trying to make pictures on the internet, I'm trying to do a chat bot, I'm trying to do something where the cost of failure is not very high, that is different than if I have financial transactions or if I have life and death. And the process that's appropriate for that is very different. So one of the things 𝗬𝗆 says that I really love is this idea of a minimum viable process. So the thing that I would do, the thing that is optimal for building a website is different than what is optimal for building the software for a car, or for building the software for medical device, or for building software for financial stuff. So people try to copy, but they don't know what to copy. They need the principles to get to the appropriate practices for their domain, more than just trying to copy what John Allspaw or someone else did, or Andrew for that matter.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning minimum viable process. It's a great concept. Coburn definitely has a lot to offer. I think he's more known for the use cases, user stories, hexagonal architecture stuff. But if you read his blog, you'll find lots of interesting things, crystal clear as well. So thank you for mentioning.
Another thing 𝗬𝗆 talked about, which only recently I saw other people get excited about, is, but he talked about this 15, 20 years ago, psychological safety, and how an organization is limited by how much trust there is and how fast information can flow based on the level of trust.
No, I didn't know that. I mean, I'm aware of the term psychological safety. I just didn't know that this was his invention.
I mean, again, I feel like it's not necessarily an invention. It's just you could find the same principles going back to these socio-technical system papers from the 1950s talking about coal mining. I feel like lots of times people like, oh, he invented that, but it's built on the giants of the past, right? Everything is the same principles going back in time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, so now we have DevOps, and of course, nothing comes without a catch. Just like the Agile industrial complex did to agility, big tech and consulting firms started turning DevOps from a mindset into a DevOps transformation package, complete with training programs, COE establishment, and of course, lots of tools. What's your take on that commercialization, and how did you personally react to it?
Again, this is a complicated thing to unwind. I'm not sure we have the time to go into all of it, but I think that you have to find this balance, right? Because we live in this world where if you don't have some money, you can't do anything, right? So there's this balance between finding the right focus on the principles and then making your living. You know, what is an honest day's work for an honest day's pay? And in the larger scheme of things, there is a very successful business model which doesn't just apply to DevOps, it applies to all these buzzwords, but there's institutionalized, what I call buzzword scavengers, that are their entire business model, and they're quite successful, is looking at the landscape and finding those things that can be exploited with their marketing, with their, you know, and they have armies of consultants and they have all this money and they go build their DevOps transformation service, and then they sell that. And I think it's also interesting when you look at this from a regional perspective, because the kinds of things that you could sell in, say, Silicon Valley are very different than what you could sell in New York City or Washington, D.C., which are very different than what you could sell in, you know, Cairo or Riyadh. So, and I'm going to make an analogy, and I made this before, and I'm speaking in English because my Arabic is terrible, but I aspire to speak Arabic better, and I get better every year. But the way that I make progress, and I research this like an academic, that you need access to native level speakers to really progress your ability in a language, right? So if I want to make my Arabic better, I need to have contextually relevant conversations with native level speakers who are willing to give me that time, and you know, because I speak like a toddler, to make progress. And I think that same analogy applies to the commercialization of all of these things. So what you have in many cases, and I think this also, you can also find examples of this for language learning, where the teacher in front of the class, you know, she's teaching French, but she's not a native French speaker, right? So you can learn some grammar, you can learn some principles, you can learn some words, but you're not going to get to a fluency. You're not going to get to where that's how you think. And that same thing happens in all of these buzzword scavenger transformations, because you don't have, you have organizations who have packaged their transformation, whether it's Agile, platform engineering, SRE, whatever you want to put a buzzword, CI/CD, microservices, and no one involved, no one in the company has ever had to do that for real, for something that they were taking responsibility for. They did that as a consultant for someone else. They inflicted that upon them, but they weren't native level speakers in the first place. So now you have people who organizationally believe that they have implemented DevOps, believe that they've implemented SRE, believe that they're implementing, we'll pick whatever buzzword, but the people that they learned from were never native in that particular thing. So the commercialization is somewhat separate, and the people who are the most successful commercializing things aren't necessarily always the same as the people who are good at it. Another perfect analogy that might resonate to a different group of people is martial arts. So when I was younger and had less responsibilities, I spent a lot of time doing martial arts, and there's very, very commercially successful martial arts studios, and then there's things that are very, very good at producing people who can fight, and those are rarely the same. Those are rarely the same thing. And I think that same thing applies here, that you have a lot of commercial success by people who are not particularly good at doing anything except for closing deals and marketing. And then the work is whatever.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. You've made a very interesting observation, and thinking about it right now, it's quite accurate that the way DevOps is sold somewhere can be very different from how it is sold somewhere else. Talking about countries, I mean, yeah, indeed. I mean, I wouldn't say sold, but definitely been through transformations in France and Egypt and in the Gulf, and every transformation was different, but within the same country, the transformation tends to be pretty much the same. In terms of culture, surprisingly, and even in terms of tools. So I'm not sure if this is what you've meant, but the observation that if the word selling is the right term to use, selling DevOps somewhere could be different from selling it somewhere else. I think that's a very accurate
well, there's a lot of
observation.
contributing factors, right? This is a deep topic, but not everyone's starting at the same place. So it's okay for them to be different. They should be different. They don't need the same things. So just starting off, it should be different. But then, is it going to take them from where they are to someplace better? And having seen, the different transformations that have been inflicted on certain organizations, I'm not always convinced that they're better off afterwards. And I think in many cases, because there's so many buzzwords in this parade of transformations, then people get a little bit of immune response or resistance or transformation fatigue, because the new boss is going to make some new buzzword thing, but it's not going to be that much better. So we're just going to keep doing what we do anyway.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take some questions from the audience, because it seems that this specific part in the conversation is important for them. So 𝗲𝗏𝗍𝗍, I think it's both a comment and a question. He's saying, do tools make culture? There's another question also from Nariman. To what extent has DevOps drifted away from its original culture foundations and evolved into a purely tool-driven movement? This is a good question. Yeah.
All right. So then there's the few lenses we can take apart this question. I'm going to go back to this socio-technical framing, and I think tools make culture and culture makes tools, right? Like it's a interplay. Because if you just say culture, and I kind of stopped using the word culture I used to say it a lot, and then the reason I stopped using it is if someone came to Egypt and said, you need to change your culture's not good, then I think most people would say, well, wait, that's what we are. This is who we are. So to me, I want to get people to focus on behavior. Like, what's the behaviors? What's the incentives? How can we keep the behaviors aligned with these incentives more than culture? When people talk about a culture problem, it's almost always because they've incentivized a behavior that makes it hard for them to do anything different. Because if you do something different, you won't be rewarded in their system. So the tools enable certain behaviors, and the behaviors enable using the tools. And then to the question from Nariman, is that how you say that?
Yeah, that's close, but good.
How would you say it?
It's Nariman. That's the way we pronounce
Nariman.
it.
Nariman. Okay, so
yeah.
So I think that it's not correct, 100% correct, to say that DevOps was originally only focused on culture. There was a big part of tools, right? If you think about Puppet and Chef and some of these early conversations, there was never a time where DevOps didn't have some aspect of the tools, which goes back to what I'm talking about a minute ago. If you think about the transitions in technology, then the new tools are what enables the new behaviors, right? So you can't just say it is only about culture. But at the same time, it's kind of a pendulum. And then what happened, which I think is the comment she's making, is that marketing gets involved. And marketing wants to sell their thing as the solution to all your DevOps problems. And so they go into this thing where, they buy. I had a few talks, this is a while ago, but like in the US, it's kind of a meme that people will buy gym equipment or a treadmill. And so I had a picture of a treadmill that was in someone's house, and it was full of a bunch of hangers with clothes. So like it was just sitting there as a way to hold the clothing on the hangers in the room. So I see tons and tons of organizations.
This is a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah. So they've gone, and some marketing and some salespeople convinced them that the solution to their DevOps problem was to buy this tool, but they didn't make any investment in changing the behaviors. They didn't make any investments in adopting that technology, using it in a way that would, take advantage of having a treadmill in your house. And so they just have a bunch of these underutilized tools floating around in an organization, and maybe all the buzzwords, but they're not fixing those principle-based interactions between the responsibility that lets we have the towel hanger treadmill. So that to me is what, and this requires leadership. This requires vision, right? You also have this resistance in organizations to doing things in a different way, right? If you come into an organization, you say, you got to change your culture, you got to change your practices. There's some people that will hear that, oh, you're going to erase what I do. That means you're going to erase my identity, right? If someone came to you and said, we're going to make it so you're not Egyptian, right? Like most people, they have an attachment to their identity. So you have to find a narrative that they can attach to in the new way of working, in using this new tool. If they don't see themselves as a hero in this new narrative, then they will often resist the change. They will often resist that transformation. So between those two things, where you've got the marketing that's convincing a leader that all they need to do is buy this tool, and then there's this lack of aligned incentives to use it in a good way, together with the resistance that these people feel that you're changing their identity, you're erasing their identity, then you get kind of stuck in the middle where there's not a lot of progress. And you see this now, we're a decade plus of significant DevOps investment in a lot of organizations who haven't seen meaningful change in their software delivery performance.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Andrew. It's a great perspective. And to me, when you said culture makes tools and tools makes culture, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And indeed, and even I've witnessed this delivering DevOps workshops. Sometimes people feel threatened when you say we're going to change culture, change rules, and all of that. Yeah, sometimes it's better to start with the tools, and you have the culture and the behavior at the back of your head, and then take people iteratively until they're able to change their behavior with the tools, and vice versa.
I think that the point that I made about the narratives is key. Like, you have to give them a path to see themselves as a better version of whatever they do with the new tool. If it's simply erasing their identity, then the resistance will be very high.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Okay, so we were talking about culture and mindset, and I think this will move us to the next question. So Agile had its manifesto, a guiding document that captured this philosophy, but DevOps never had one. The CALMS model, do you see that as the closest thing to a DevOps manifesto? I mean, if you search DevOps manifesto, you will find one article that kind of tries to imitate the Agile manifesto. But do you think the CALMS model is the closest thing to a DevOps manifesto, or it doesn't matter? This is just some formality.
So there was some deliberate reaction to the commercialization of Agile, where and also because the practices were emergent, right? If you came and said, and I still think this is true now, especially with the way things are changing rapidly with the AI tools, if you said this is the way to do it, you have to do it this way, or it's not DevOps, then you're actually doing a disservice to these emergent practices. And maybe we're farther along and you could do something that looks like that codification, but it was somewhat deliberate as a reaction to some of the things that we'd witnessed with the Agile community, and that, you mentioned the Agile industrial complex, where we sort of wanted to avoid that, but in a way that actually probably made it worse, because it allowed all of these disparate groups to kind of legitimize their DevOps certification or their DevOps version of reality, instead of getting this truly principle-based approach to it. And there were other things, like I made some blog posts, and there's a thing that I kind of made as a manifesto personally, and there's things floating around. But as a conscious decision, we didn't necessarily want to center it on any one thing, and that probably had a mixed impact on the way some of it evolved. We were trying to avoid what we saw as a problem, or what we were reacting to with the way Agile got commercialized, but we didn't necessarily avoid any of those problems. So that's a lesson learned. Did I freeze? Did you freeze? Ahmed. For some reason, I can't hear you. I can see you talking, but I can't hear you. There seems to be a technical difficulty.
Yeah, I can hear you well. It seems,
Now
it seems I'm going through some connectivity issues. Yeah, can you hear me well right now?
Absolutely, perfect.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so today we're living in the AI era. Okay, so AI took us all by surprise, and we've seen a wave of new ops terms appear. So in the past, we had DevSecOps, FinOps, BizDevOps, and all of these eDevOps extensions. Now we have AIOps, MLOps, LLOps, and so on. So how do you see DevOps evolving in the AI era? Is it adding real value? Of course, I'm talking about the AI. Or is it just another hype cycle or bubble?
Which is the hype cycle? The AI?
Yeah. So there's this big hype now around AI, and people are talking about a bubble. And AI has found a place everywhere in the software development lifecycle, from planning to ops. So yeah, is it adding value in DevOps in terms of tools and practices, or is it just another hype?
So I think both of these things can be true simultaneously, that there is a meaningful technological change that is enabled by this new technology. And at the same time, some of the enthusiasm, and particularly the financial projections, are not in line with the reality. And you see this cycle over and over. This is not a new phenomena. So you have the same cycle with the .com, where there was a bubble that was then burst, but all the American companies that dominate the top of the market now were basically born in that time. So my own personal feeling is the AI is transformative for a lot of things, but then the financial things need to kind of come in line with the reality before we get to the new normal. So I don't know what everyone's using in their day-to-day life, but it seems it's hard to do anything with software these days and not be at least somewhat aware of the technology that's available to help you do that. I think AI is changing a lot of my own practices. It's changing every day. There's new models, there's new tools around this. And then at the same time, when you think about this earlier frame we had around operations and the value of software running, that it's in some ways exacerbating and potentially catastrophically for some organizations, the divide between the software development cycle and the operation. So in the past, we had this narrative of the wall of confusion where developers would do something and then they would give it to the operators, and the operators would have to figure it out. And if there's a problem, maybe they can wake up the developers or they fix it the next day. But now we're moving into this where, in some sense, no one in the organization understands how the code works. And now you got to operate it. And I don't know what everyone else is experiencing, but the AIs are very good at generating things by at least the current version and excitement around generative AI. They're not always very good at making decisions. And if you have, and again, I don't know what your personal experiences are, so I can't speak directly to where you're at with this journey, but my own experience is that it's like 50% I'm blown away by how much you can do with these tools, and 50% I'm very upset at the absolutely ridiculous thing that this thing decided to do with my instructions. And I think we're a long ways away from having this operational burden be something that the AIs can account for. And just to give you what I think is probably the most advanced AI organization in the world is Google. And Google, and maybe they'll get there, and they'll probably make an example of it. They still have SREs. They still have people. They don't believe that they can turn over all of their operational responsibilities to the AIs just yet. So I still think for a long time you're going to need this, what I'm going to call augmented intelligence, right? So it's not about the AIs doing everything. It's about the humans doing more because the AI tools are available. But you still need to account for these operational responsibilities. And you are a very, very brave organization, and probably a foolish one if you're ready to turn that over to AI today.
Yeah, we are starting to see the word augmented getting attached to everything with AI. Kent Beck is using the term augmented coding now, or augmented programming. Yeah. The funny thing is that before AI, people were talking about no ops, but that idea never really took off. Now with AI writing code, testing, and even managing deployments, do you think we are circling back to the same concept?
I think that we're like the people who tried to popularize no ops. In many ways, when you drill down into it, it wasn't no ops. There was always ops somewhere, right? What was the question is, who does ops and for what and for why? And if you go back, we can go through the history of the use of that term and who was using it and why. What they're actually talking about is a self-service platform strategy that will remove some of the operational burden from developers because they have somewhat constrained the types of things that you're deploying, right? Because if you think about, you mentioned the 12 factors, which I'm a big fan of, and I should probably blog some of this, but when you think about the 12-factor thing, that was basically marketing from Heroku. And if you go through the 12 factors, each of those is about a promise that the platform is going to be able to keep to the things that are running on top of it. So if you have 0 factors, then you can keep 0 promises. And the 12-factor app implies the 12-factor ops, implies the 12-factor platform that those 12 factors can plug into. If you don't have that platform existing, then the 12-factor app is not, like, it's just extra work for nothing, right? So that to me is the story, is to what extent can you design your platform in such a way that it can keep promises about operations, can keep promises about reliability to the developers. So you're removing some of the burden of having that in the app by enforcing the architecture with the platform, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this actually makes perfect sense. Okay, let's move to the future of DevOps. So other than AI, what trends are shaping the future of DevOps right now?
I mean, I think AI is shaping the future of everything. So I don't want to say that there's not significant opportunity to optimize much of the work that we're doing in all of the software lifecycle with some of the AI tools. So that's the biggest by far. There's lots of interesting conversations. If you think about the life cycle of the models themselves, I don't know where everyone is or what their organization are trying to do, but to me, there's this distinction between what I'll call generated and generative, right? So are you taking the models and producing code that's just like the old, deterministic world, right? That's a very different thing to have to deal with than exposing anything probabilistic to your customers or users internally. That opens up a whole bunch of other things about performance, cost, security, than using the tools to augment the generation of code. This is so emergent, right? I don't like making predictions about the future when it feels like the next day is different than today. Every single day, I feel like we're changing rapidly, and it's just about getting into the flow of the work. So to what extent are you using, I don't know what you all are using day to day, but if you have seen what these things like Cursor can do, or Google just released anti-gravity, the types of things that you have available to generate code, to be able to do, built into Google Cloud, they have some pretty impressive kind of like SRE analysis of your deployment that can both analyze and remediate some of the different things that you're seeing. Do you want to read that question? Because I think that's very interesting.
Okay, so this is a question from 𝗷𝗆𝗆. So she's asking, I see Agile is more concerned with product management. In your point of view, which role is responsible to embrace the DevOps culture, like the Scrum Master in Scrum?
So I don't know if that is a tripwire, or I'm going to get maybe slightly ranty, because I do not see the need for Scrum Masters in any regard at all. And I'll tell you why. So I feel like this goes back to my initial conversation about why I didn't like my first exposure to Agile, because it's not about process. It's about getting people to embrace, like the manifesto says, we value these things over process, but then people show up and they're like, here's the process. So, and then you give someone a class for 2 days and all of a sudden you call them a master, and their job is to like be the one who kind of proselytizes the process. And for what I believe, and Pivotal was probably the most pure XP consulting organization. There's some other things that most of you probably never heard of, but we had pair programming, we had TDD all day, every day, and 0 Scrum Masters. So I don't like this idea that you put this sort of load-bearing role to get people to do the thing on a single person. Like the process is all of our responsibility, which means we're all responsible for defining our process. We're all responsible for embracing our process. And that doesn't mean that we all do that equally every day. But if you just take and put that on one person, then I think that it's in the wrong place, and they add less value than they could if they were more engaged in the technology, more engaged in the process. But the other thing that this person's question brings up, which is I think is critical to this thread that we were just on, is and I'm seeing this in real time in some of the organizations that I speak to, the velocity increase that is coming from the AI tools is exposing how poor most organizations are at product management. That the bottleneck that represents, both in terms of the throughput and the direction, that most organizations have these kind of roadmaps that are just they're not expressed in some kind of quantified way. They're not directed by a hypothesis that anyone's tested. It's just whoever happened to be in the product management role, they're projecting this imagined future onto this backlog, and then people go build it. Now those backlogs can be built in days, maybe hours. And so the bottleneck is, are we building something that matters? Are we getting the feedback loop that we need to be successful in whatever that sense that means, right? If not everyone I work with is necessarily constrained by the economics, but if you're trying to compete in a market, how are you validating this roadmap? That becomes this critical thing. But I would also go back to the point I was making before. I personally, and this is something people can argue with if they like, I don't like that product management becomes a singular point, that the strongest organizations, in my opinion, and I'll go to Amazon as an example, in their culture, the products, the idea for new products primarily come from engineers. That if anyone wants to build something, they write a paper and argue for why they should build it with the metrics that they want to test for its success, this fitness function. And in many organizations, because it simplifies a bunch of things in the org chart, you put all of this pressure for success on one PM, one product manager, and they're both the most important and the least defined role in the whole organization. And I don't think most organizations are very good at it. And the AI, the acceleration that's happening with AI is just exposing how poorly product management works in many organizations.
That's a great answer, Andrew. Thank you so much. And I would like to add something to your answer for 𝗖𝗄, that since day one, Agile has always been about collective ownership. And many years ago, we've started seeing the ensemble programming movement, or we had pair programming, which was the first version of collaborative programming. And now we're talking about the team truly owning the whole process and every task in software development using mobbing. So it doesn't matter anymore what title you have in the team. I think that in a truly agile team, you must have collective ownership. And one of the ways I tried, and it does really promote that concept, is mob programming. I mean, when you've got the whole team gathered in one place, and we're doing the design, we're doing writing tests, we're writing the production code, we're doing the refactoring, and all the way up to deploying to production collectively. This is the true spirit of agility. So I think that one of the things I don't like about Scrum is, roles. So you've got a PO and an SM and developers, and everybody has this set of responsibilities. Actually, everyone should own everything that is necessary for the team to deliver value through working software. All right. Okay, I guess we've steered the hornet's nest. I'm not sure if you want to answer this question or not, but let me put it on the screen. So, so if we don't have Scrum Masters or product managers, who's going to handle reporting to management or steering committees and all of that?
So this is a great question, and I think that the answer is framed in the question. So who are you reporting to, and what are you reporting, and why? And I believe that the reason this is something that happens is because there's a lack of information, right? So if you have built a system that is observable, and I don't mean the technical system, I mean the actual software process. So if you are a manager or you're an executive and you can go look at a screen that shows you where all the things are in the flow from, you could look at all the DORA metrics, you could look at all the lean metrics, throughput, cycle time, all these things. What is the point of having some person come tell you that? And again, I'll go back to 𝗬𝗆. So one of the things 𝗬𝗆 got me excited about in early conversations is this idea of information radiators, right? And if you have enough information radiators, then you don't need to have all these meetings. You don't need to have all these reports. It's not a mystery. From an ops perspective, there's this enlightenment that happens when you put all the metrics on a system, perhaps on a big wall where everyone can see it. Every executive, every developer, every operator can see the running system. How much money, how many users, how many whatever is running through the system, and you feel you'll need less reporting because it's not a mystery. Everyone can see everything. And then when you do have the meetings, you already have the metrics. And like a lot of what I see reported is sort of the feelings, and you also have cultural issues. Again, I don't know exactly how you work or where you work, but it's what I like to call the watermelon reporting, which has got its own symbolism now. But you have the people that are the practitioners who think everything is red, and then by the time the report gets to the executives, everything's green.
Yeah, we've all seen that for sure. Okay, so I think we are running out of time. So I think we'll take 2 more questions from the audience, and then we'll close with 1 more question, and then we can finalize the session. So Walid is asking, how do you see the difference between platform engineering and DevOps?
I don't think there's a single novelty that's been introduced by any of the platform engineering conversation, and you won't find any of my I centered all of my DevOps conversations on platform going back to about 2014. So you already heard me say a few versions of this, but if you're trying to do microservices, continuous delivery, and you don't have something that looks suspiciously like a platform, you're going to have a bad time. If you go read the SRE book, there's the use of the word platform all over the place, and at least 2 chapters where that's a significant focus of the chapter. So like the idea that platform engineering was anything other than like someone needed a new buzzword to market, from the buzzword scavenger perspective, because they already failed on their DevOps initiative, then that's why you have it. But I don't see them as being different. At the same time, if you're an individual and you can get a new job and a raise, changing your title, then you have my blessing. Go do that.
Okay, so another question from Walid. What's your advice for a team that deals with consistent firefights?
Oh, this is the age-old question, isn't it? I think that the core of this question is really, why are you having the fires? And the main determiner, or a significant contribution to this is, in most organizations, operations is treated like an afterthought, and you're underfunded, you're under-resourced relative to the demands on that team. So until you get a leadership level initiative that is willing to make the investment that culturally we are going to let people sleep through the night, then it's going to be hard. One thing that I think helps in relatively rapid fashion, and this is going to be controversial in some places, is if you make the developers on the call rotation, then they will immediately have less outages. If you have a separate team that is in a long feedback loop from the actual development, and the developers have no feedback loop or no consequences for deploying things that are going to be operationally problematic, then why would they optimize for anything except for their own sleep? So getting the leadership to understand the value of reliability and getting the developers to have some consequences for making things unreliable is probably the main first steps. But it's a struggle in a lot of organizations, and especially until you can. Here's good advice for everyone in their career: the more you can frame the problem in the language of the business, which in most cases is going to be money, then you're always going to be on the losing side of whoever can make the arguments stronger about money. So if you look at the history of reliability at Google, site reliability engineering was born because Google can very precisely calculate how many dollars they lose if the site is down. They can calculate how many dollars they lose if the site is slow, right? Because they did all of this tests and all these calculations on latency. So if you can get the frame for the fires that you're dealing through the lens to the business, that this is actually costing you money, and not just we're just complaining because our life is hard, then you're gonna see more progress.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I wrote an article a few years ago. It was called the Never May Always Rule. So it was like a couple of, I grouped a couple of practices and metrics into things that management will never understand, may understand, and will always understand. So if you go tell management, TDD, CI, CD, small batches, etc., this is something that management will never understand, okay? Because this is all technical. But then management will always understand ROI, NPV, Net Promoter Score. They will understand such things. And as you said, when you frame the problem in terms of money, the way that people that are good with money can, you're on the winning side.
People always respond better if you can speak to them in their language.
Exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, so let's take the last question. This is actually a prepared question. So what advice would you give to new engineers entering a world where DevOps is taken for granted, but often misunderstood?
So I said before, I didn't really like the term DevOps, or I didn't love it when it was born. And there's a bunch of reasons related to some of the stuff we've been talking about, that it's confusing, it's too limiting. So my advice really for anyone is, don't constrain yourself by some label. Don't say like, I'm a DevOps person or I'm a platform person. Say, I fix problems, I solve problems, and then go find a problem that you want to solve, or in the organization that you're sponsored by, fix problems. So this, I think, also relates back to the conversation about language. So my Arabic is like a toddler, but I aspire to be better. And I had a teacher, and I asked, what do I need to do to be fluent in Arabic? And they said, that's the wrong way to think about it. You're not even fluent in English. There are conversations you can have because you have a vocabulary and you have an understanding, and there's conversations that you can't have. So what you should be thinking about are the conversations that you want to have, the conversations that you need to have. And in the context of this question, that's the advice I'd give you, is find a problem that you want to solve, that you're so obsessed with solving, and then figure out what you need to do to solve that. Whatever technology, don't limit yourself by labels, don't limit yourself by vocabulary. Go fix that problem. And the skills that you will get and the vocabulary that you'll get from solving that problem by being aware of what it took to solve that problem will open up new doors for you. And those problems, we're not going to run out of problems anytime soon. There's no shortage of problems, either in technology or the technology can help address. So just find an opportunity to do something that's valuable to you. Find the intersection of the things that you're interested in and they're interested for the organization, and don't limit yourself by I'm going to do this thing. And I already used the martial arts analogy, so I'll use one of the teachers that I had. He said, don't ever tell someone, oh, I only fight this way, or that's the wrong punch. Like you just have to go fight. When it's a real fight, you can't be, oh, that's not Agile, or that's not DevOps, or that's not this thing that I want to make this label about. The punch that hits you is never wrong. So you just have to respond in the moment. The advice that I give you today, November 25th, that might be wrong for the world that you're about to move into. So don't get constrained by what advice someone gives you. They're an expert. You have your own knowledge, you have your own understanding, and you should look to apply that and look to expand that, and you're going to be fine. And believe you can. That's another thing, that if you believe you can't, you're right. So you should believe you can.
That's a very strong message to end the conversation with. Thank you so much, Andrew. This was an incredibly rich conversation, one of those rare moments where you get to hear the story straight from someone who helped shape the movement itself. Andrew, your insights and the journey you walked us through from Agile infrastructure all the way to the AI era, it was truly invaluable. I want to thank everyone who joined us live today. Your questions, your engagement, and your energy are what make these sessions special. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow Tech Cafe on LinkedIn and YouTube. We have more conversations coming up, and we'd love to have you with us every time. Andrew, once again, thank you for being with us, and to everyone watching.
I want to add one more thing. Just because it's so obvious to me, but hopefully it's obvious to everyone else to take advantage of this. The world that we are in right now, with the AI tools that are available mostly for free or for very little investment, are exceptionally good at helping you learn things. And ChatGPT has replaced a lot of my Arabic studies. Like I can, if someone wants to reach out and get advice, it's a fantastic tool to learn any technology. So whatever barrier you thought you had before to learning and needed training, or I want to go take this class, you can turn these tools into great teachers that will, whatever problem I was talking about before, they will unlock that topic for you almost immediately.
Yeah, I agree. 𝗷𝗲𝗀 in his book Agile Adoption Patterns, he had one full chapter called "Learning is the Bottleneck." So any tool or piece of technology that will help us break that bottleneck is definitely a go for tool, and AI is not an exception. Thank you so much, Andrew. And to everyone watching us, stay curious, keep learning, and see you on the next episode. Have a great day.
Shukran. Masalam.
مع السلامة.